What's going on, everyone? My name is John Morales, and today we're going to be discussing how to slow down aging and what can we do to work on our biology. What our biology is going to tell us that we're going to slow down and we're going to, go through the process of what aging is. But what can we do to work on these things to improve not only our performance but the quality of life that we're going to have? The truth is that everyone ages, but how we train really determines how we feel. And there's a thing that a lot of people like to say is, your physiology has a certain age, and then you have your age, right? Because you can be, let's say, 25, but you feel that your body is probably younger, right? You feel that you're still as good as you were when you were 20. This thing also happens as you get older, but you have to understand that your body has different phases of adaptations, and whatever you decide to expose your body to, your body will have an acclimation, right? So if you're used to running, as you get older, running is not something that's going to be relatively new to you. It's going to be something that you can work on in terms of specificity. Are you trying to get faster? Are you trying to have more endurance? There's things that you can really work on. Now, in terms of understanding success with this, right? I would say I have I've had the blessing to train a general amount of populations, and I'm ranging from ages as early as 10 years old all the way to 65 years old. And I would say that the individuals that are taking care of themselves later have more independence as I've gotten older. And this is something that a lot of times we don't take in consideration because you don't think about these problems now, right? We're young, we're able to move, we're healthy. But as we get older, think about how hard it is to have things become heavier, lose your coordination, and then being able to do simple tasks like put something in the fridge, right? Putting a gallon of milk in the fridge, taking out something from the oven, being able to bend and flex, things like being able to have the power to open up a door that is heavy, right? All these things we don't take in consideration because we were relatively young, right? And it's not a challenge to us. But if you think about somebody that you've been around that's older, they have a lot more challenges in a day that we possibly have because they're limited to their biology. Their physiology doesn't allow them to work on certain things. So when you think about long term, there's a lot of things that we can tackle at a year earlier age. So first, I want to talk to you guys about something called the aging curve. Now, there's a lot of information and a lot of research on this. There's a book called "The Bending the Aging Curve," and it's a great book, and it really dives into the phenomenon of being able to get older. Right? Like, why is it that we start dropping in our performance? So, for women and men, there's actually a time where we start dropping in terms of performance. For men, it tends to be that you stop dropping your peak performance around 28, 32. So around that range, if you're working on truly maximizing your potential, this is where the drop off starts happening. For women, it can happen around 26 to 28 to 30. So around the same range, but sometimes a little bit earlier. And it also has to do with the fact of that the individual is given birth, right? There's going to be things that are going to happen in this natural selection that we have to pay attention to. And these are things that naturally happen to us. One thing I want to note out is that think about athletes, right? A lot of athletes, if you think about being 30, you don't think about 30 being old, right? But why is it that being 30 in basketball or 30 in baseball is considered old? It's because your biology at that time, you start slowing down, right? Yes, you might be at your peak performance at that time, but After 30, now your contract negotiations probably look a little bit different. And if you're a natural consumer of sports, you know that you're looking at this athlete, he's like, well, he's 35. He might not be performing like he used to. Things like reaction times are slowing down. Things like your muscles being able to be as elastic, right? If you're not training these portions of your body being able to adapt, you're going to have a harder time maintaining it. And one of the things that we lose, and one of the first things to go, is reaction time, coordination, and also the ability to have force, have power. Power is one of the main things that go first, and it's interesting because when you think about power, we're not talking about strength, right? We're talking about being able to move fast, being able to produce high amount of force fast and violently. So jumping, sprinting, that kind of movement is what we tend to lose earlier. So since we're losing these things, what is it that we can do to maintain it? So I would like to say that the reasons why men start dropping off is because they have a decline in testosterone. Testosterone tends to slow down around 35 to 40, and a lot of men like to check their testosterone so they can have replacement therapy, right? So what they call TRT. And around, it's interesting because what I've seen from the men point of view, a lot of men, right? It's a very interesting thing that I'm seeing now. They get to the age of being 38, 35, and they're like, oh, well, I'm going to jump on TRT. It could be very interesting because for me, it's like, you probably don't need that yet. You shouldn't be relying on this yet. You have to check a lot of factors and a lot of boxes off, right? You first have to consider, well, you might have low testosterone, and this can lead to other things, right? Libido, the fact that you're not getting sufficient rest, you're not feeling as energized as before. And these things are true, but you also have to look at the whole picture in terms of what is happening throughout your day that you're not meeting, right? Are you having enough calories? Are you eating sufficient amounts of protein? Are you working a schedule that isn't giving you the rest you need, right? What is your natural body score in terms of HRV, right? What in terms of your heart rate, are you having a higher heart rate than someone else when it's at resting, right? So if your resting heart rate is high, it's telling me that we probably need to work on your cardiovascular system. So there's a lot of things that we need to target before we can even say, in my opinion, let me jump on TRT. Because as you know, and I'll give you some experience, I've gone to a doctor, right? And I've gotten these tests done to check my testosterone levels. And interestingly enough, what I've been told is my testosterone levels have been low before, right? And the average where you want to be, it's around 400 to 500, right? But I've gotten scores like 250, 220, and I don't feel like I'm actually tired. So the question is, are you really getting your testosterone levels? Are your testosterone levels are they really dissipating? Is that really happening? So I started doing a little bit more research, and what I found is that testosterone levels change throughout the day, right? So your testosterone levels in the morning typically are very high. As you go out throughout the day, they change and they may rise at night again. And it just depends. Or did you just finish having a workout? If you have a workout that you expose yourself to high strength, high stress, you might have high testosterone now. So it's interesting because the times I have gone done it, it's been midday, it's been at 12, and I have had to fast before that. So those are factors that can come into my scores, right? I have not ate, I didn't train before, I worked the whole morning, I go get my scores, and now it's telling me that I'm low. So am I really low, right? And now I've done the test again, and I've been back to 600 or wherever the numbers I needed to be. So a lot of the things that I like to point out is like, you might not be in that situation where you need it. And I understand there's a lot of individuals that want to get on it just to get ahead of the curve, just want to start feeling better. But the things that you have to be cognizant of is that once you get on these supplementations, right? Once you start supplementing TRT, now your body has a natural way of producing this. Your normal levels might be now dissipating just because you're already giving your body TRT as a replacement, right? You're giving your body that testosterone as a replacement. So your body's natural production tends to drop off, right? And this is very normal. Again, we're animals that adapt. We adapt to anything. So you have to be understanding of that. Women, right? What can be some of the reasons and causes that you start dropping in terms of the age curve is because you go through estrogen dropping, right? You have to think about bone density, your joints, also muscle retention as you get older. And not only that, you have premenopause, postmenopause, right? And when you're going through this time, right, you're going to change your physiology. And during this time, there's obviously replacement therapies that you can also do, right? As just as men do in terms of testosterone replacement therapy, but you also have to understand there's other things that we can work on from the perspective of training and really taking care of ourselves, because there's a lot of things that go into this that are very detailed. So before we start diving into like all the external factors, I would say look at the quality of life that you're having. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you eating enough food? Which is something that I'm probably gonna have an episode on. Is a lot of people think they're eating a lot throughout the day. And it's interesting because I've worked with a lot of clients, and I tell them, do me a favor, track your foods, track what you're eating throughout the day, and let's see what you're eating. You'll be lucky, right? Let's say you go out and you don't have too much time and you have to probably get Chipotle or Chick-fil-A. That's fine. Just put in what you're eating. You'll be surprised, maybe, just maybe, if you get to 1,800 calories, right? And 1,800 calories, depending on the individual, says a lot because you don't know how many calories you're burning throughout the day. You might be burning twice the amount, depending on the job that you have. Or maybe you have a very sedentary job and you're eating more than what your body's requiring you to expend, right? So you have to also understand these other factors. It's not just, okay, my body's slowing down, but why is it also slowing down? There's other reasons. What's the problem with our fuel, and what can we do in terms of our fuel, right? So now the science of the bending aging curve, right? The science of bending the aging curve is there's gonna be things that are gonna slow down. But first, we'll talk about mitochondrial dysfunction. You start losing more mitochondria. What does mitochondria mean? Mitochondria is basically the power cell that we all have in our bodies, and this is basically how your body is able to receive energy, transfer energy, and be able to store energy as well. And we start losing that if we don't build that. And what do I mean by building? You can actually build more mitochondria by training, by doing more aerobic based exercises, or doing exercises that are high intensity and are repeated bouts, things like Tabatas, things like EMOMs, AMRAPs, that kind of stuff can help promote more mitochondria by simply building more capillaries. And you're probably thinking like, what are capillaries, or what does that have to do with mitochondria? Well, we all know we have veins and we have arteries, right? Well, your veins also have these extensions, right? And think about like a spider web, right? And it has these extensions that you can actually build more veins, if I was to call it that, more veins, and those are called capillaries. And those capillaries actually expand to the muscle tissue, and they deliver mitochondria and other nutrients that go with it. So if you're able to build more of that capacity, you have more endurance. So guess what? With more endurance, more oxygen, you're able to sleep better, recover better. Again, quality of life. And this happens because you're training, right? Another thing is you slow down in terms of recovery. Your body isn't recovering as good as it used to, right? You're getting older, but what also happens within this time of getting older? More stress, right? You probably have kids now. You probably have a busier schedule. You have things to do, right? Your schedule isn't as selfish as it once was, right? Now you have to constantly be up and doing different things. You have to get the kids ready for school, that kind of stuff, right? So because you're having all of this, your body has less time to actually recover, and this can cause aging, of course, right? If you don't have sufficient recovery, you're not getting enough sleep. Think about that, right? Now, I always like to point out when I'm giving a lecture, right? What I like to do is I like to put a picture of a president the first year in office and the towards the end of their term, and you can see the stress in their face within those 4 years. And I always say it's pretty amazing what happens. Look at head coaches, right? Look how stressed they've looked from the moment they got their job to the end of their tenured. Obviously, age happens, but just look at a 4 year run, right? There's a lot of stress that goes with that. Even coaches are at that high level. You can see that coaches have probably won a championship and have a lot of high stress. Look how that ages them. It ages you because of stress. Now, we're going to talk about two things. Sarcopenia. Sarcopenia is a age-related issue that happens. And what is sarcopenia? Sarcopenia basically is when your muscle tissues actually start to lose the elasticity and lose the strength that it once had. It actually loses its size. And sarcopenia is a natural thing that starts happening to older individuals. Typically, it happens around 40 or 35 in terms of how early, right? But this is something typically you see from ages 40 to 50, and it happens to both men and females. So it's something that you have to be very aware of, because things like sarcopenia, think you're losing muscle mass. This is going to be something that is going to affect your anatomy and how you move, how strong you feel throughout the day. Then other thing that I'm going to point out is that you have osteoporosis. And osteoporosis is basically the same thing, but for bones. What happens is that your bones, everyone knows, obviously you have calcium in your bones, right? Now, if I was to saw a bone, right? Let's talk about your femur. If I also saw your femur down and we look at the middle of the bone, you're going to see a lot of little holes, right? As you get older, those holes actually become bigger, right? Think about limestone. It's very similar in that sense that you actually start losing the strength that your bone has. So your bones actually start losing its mass and losing its strength. And this can be a very problematic thing as we get older, because there's a lot of other risk factors that could come with this. So what you guys have probably seen, or you probably heard, someone that is at the age of 60 and higher and doesn't have the sufficient strength um, in terms of bone density, they can fall and break their hip. And why is this such a big problem? Because as you get older, if you fall and you break your hip, and think about the hip bone, it's a very strong structured bone. If that gets broken, think about now you're going to become more sedentary. You're going to have to be in bed rest. Do you think you get stronger in this time? No. You're actually becoming weaker. And this can lead to other things, right? If that person doesn't have the proper care, you can go into liver and kidney failure. And these are going to be things that obviously are very extreme, but these are things that very much happen. I know of a lot of individuals that have loved ones as this has happened to, and you think, well, could we have done something to prevent this or help prevent this, right? And yes, you could we can all do something, and obviously it's taking care of ourselves, but a lot of that is exposure to strength training. So I want to say, how do we keep ourselves safe from this, and how can we work on getting better at this? Well, two things. You have to think that you have to train hard, but you also have to train smart. If you think about training as a woman, right? You think about, well, I'm gonna deal with sarcopenia, I'm gonna deal with osteoporosis. These are things that are gonna naturally happen, but what is it that I can do? Well, what I would recommend is obviously get the exposure to weightlifting, right? You want to do some sort of resistance training. You want to be able to maintain that muscle mass. You want to be able to build strength in terms of your bones, right? Allowing yourself to keep the structure of the anatomy that you have and work on your physiology in that sense. Another thing is that you have to understand that when you turn 30, every year you start dropping 1% in terms of muscle mass. So if you're not training around this time, right, let's say I'm assuming most of you guys are around 25, 30, 35, but around 30, if you're not training this, that decline is 1% every year for the natural person that doesn't really train, right? But if you're training, obviously you maintain that. That curve is not as steep, and as that slope is not as steep, and you actually get to make that slope last a little bit longer. So you get to maintain it. But if we know we're dropping 1% every year, we need to keep that muscle mass. We need to keep our bones strong, right? Another thing is you see a lot of men, right? You go to the gym, you see a lot of men training in the weightlifting area, and you see a lot of women training on the treadmills, training on the cardio section, right? Now this is a really interesting part because, like I like to tell everyone, this should be opposite. This is where women should actually be in the weight training section and men should be in the cardio section. And you don't ever see this when you go to the gym. You actually see quite the opposite. You see all the males actually in the weight training area and all the females in the cardio area because the goals are different. But really, it should be swapped. And the reason why I say that is because men deal with a lot of cardiovascular disease. As we get older as men, this is one of the most predominant factors and things that are going to appear for us, right? So, cardiovascular disease is going to be something that's going to get in our way, and we have to do our best to prevent that. Things like us, things like arthrosclerosis, arteriosclerosis, thinking about the plaque buildup that you can actually be building. And this doesn't just happen through bad nutrition. There's things like building calcium around your heart. Now, a lot of you guys have probably heard of a lot of healthy individuals probably go out on a run by themselves or do a workout, and out of nowhere they drop dead. And you're thinking like, how this happens? Well, the reason why this happens is because there's things like sudden death syndrome, and it happens. It's a very sad situation, but it happens to a lot of people. And then typically the group that I've seen it most is typically more firefighters and more policemen. And it's because their jobs are constantly high stress. And because that constant high stress, if you were to actually do a calcium score, what they basically do, they do a sonogram around your heart and they get to see if you have calcium buildup around your arteries and around your veins and your heart, because this actually causes plaque. And similar to arteriosclerosis, it kind of builds in that sense. And this can happen because you're not taking care of yourself or because you have a high stress job. So it's things that you need to pay attention to and be very aware of, because if this happens, it's something that you won't know until later. So it's, again, everyone knows heart attacks, strokes are the silent killers in that sense. You don't really know a lot of times that you're even dealing with that, right? Or you're even close to that. And that's why I say you have to be very mindful of how you're approaching your body, because all these things are in front of us. They're coming our way. It's like obstacles are going to come our way. But what can we do now to better prepare ourselves for these things, right? And it's important that we, as men, we train the heart to not only get stronger, right, but allow our veins to have the elasticity, right, that we need to be able to have those muscle contractions. And women actually need to get under the bar, maybe lift some heavy weights, right? You want to see the older ladies being able to deadlift if they can possibly do it with the right technique. You want to see them bench pressing. You want to see the opposite rows happen. And those the individuals that are doing it and they are applying that to their life, you're going to see the drastic changes. And obviously, you want to include movements like power movements. What do I mean by power movements? So jumping, sprinting, skipping, all these kind of movements are going to complement the way you're actually moving and the way you actually feel. Obviously, you have to be very cautious of how you implement it because you don't want to go from 0 to 100, but it's something you want to do, right? So, some closing thoughts. The decline is real, guys, and this is something that's a phenomenon that happens with us, and unfortunately, we have to deal with it, right? But it's how we prepare ourselves for that, and what is it that we can do to allow our longevity to happen. And we're that new generation. We're the new generation that actually has so much information, so much things that we can attack. So it's interesting that we need to implement it. Um, Strength in the long game is going to help us, and then cardiovascular exercises are also going to help us. But again, understand the needs that you need. What is it that you need to work on, right? And don't just rule out how you're feeling. Pay attention to how you're feeling. The quality of life says a lot. How you spend your time, even think about where you live, right? Look at, I always recommend my clients to buy stuff like Garmin's, Oura Rings, Whoops, things that they can keep biomarkers on. Look how many steps you're taking in a day, right? All these things change because now you're getting this information and you're more mindful. Hey, I've only walked 3 miles today, and that's not a lot of steps, right? So the typical person, if you were talking about 10,000 steps, maybe you're talking about 6 to 7 miles. It's a little bit more walking, but can you do it? Absolutely. You can wake up earlier, go for a walk, whether you're walking your dog, or maybe you're around a neighborhood that complements that kind of behavior, right? If you think about metropolitan cities and suburb cities are very different. And you can actually check where you live, the walkable score. This is something we do in class to kind of see the score of where you live. So if you put, like, for example, us, we live in Miami. When you, depending on the area that you live, you put the name of the city and you put the location, and it will tell you how walkable that location is. And you'd be surprised, a lot of places, especially in Miami, are not that walkable. And you also have to understand who wants to walk when it's blazing hot outside and it's super humid, right? So it depends on where you live. If you live more of a suburb city, there's not going to be a lot of things that you can go to. Maybe there isn't a coffee shop around the corner, so it's more difficult in that sense. So maybe you have to force yourself to go out there and walk. So yeah, guys, hope you guys enjoy this video. This is we're slowly growing. And within this week, I've been doing a lot of shorts. So I hope you guys appreciate that. If you guys like this kind of content, man, share, like, subscribe. I appreciate all of you guys. It's work to put this kind of content out there and really be informative, intentful, but also deliver something that you guys can really take home and really just put into perspective. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'll see you guys the next time.